In the dark depths of the ocean, exactly 312 miles off the Venezuelan coast on a fateful morning in January 2026, the faintest sound in the sea echoed a hydraulic whisper as the torpedo tube doors of a 53-year-old German submarine creaked open. On board the Sabalo, this rusted relic from a bygone era, 64 Venezuelan sailors believed they were making history by sinking the USS Gerald R, America's $13 billion supercarrier. Driven by blind hatred for the USA, this symbol of Western dominance that they saw as the oppressor of their nation, they pulled the trigger, an act of pure aggression that ignited years of resentment between the two nations like an exploding powder keg. Yet they had no idea that history had already been written 6 days earlier by analysts in Norfolk who foresaw this attack before the submarine even left port. Dear listeners, hold your breath because what happened next will shock you. The US Navy's response was not what anyone expected. It changed naval warfare forever. The hunter became the hunted, and the Venezuelan military, supported by Russian advisors and outdated Kremlin technology, was humiliated in a way that left the world in awe. Sensational reports from secret sources reveal Russian generals in Moscow were fuming with rage when they learned of the fiasco for Venezuela was their proxy in the fight against the West, further proof of the incompetence of the Russian military machinery, which is sinking into corruption and obsolescence while sending allies to their doom. At 3:47 a.m., exactly 30 minutes before the Venezuelan captain gave his fire order, 3 Virginia-class submarines, those state-of-the-art silent killers of the U.S. Navy, each weighing 7,800 tons, 115 meters long, and powered by nuclear reactors offering endless endurance, formed a deadly triangle around the Sabalo. The distances were precisely 1,800, 2,100, and 2,400 yards, a formation that lured the enemy into an invisible trap. The sonar operators of the USS Mississippi, equipped with the advanced AN/BQQ-10 system capable of detecting sounds at frequencies up to 100 kilohertz, heard every single valve noise inside the target. They logged 23 distinct mechanical sounds in the final hour hydraulic pump cycles with a pressure of 200 bar ballast tank adjustments, shifting water volumes of up to 500 tons, and even the captain's voice echoing through the intercom, a command dripping with revenge and hatred, yet in reality only initiating his own humiliation. Each American unit had loaded 2 Mark 48 AD cap torpedoes, those 3,500-pound behemoths with a range of 38 kilometers and a speed of 55 knots, whose firing solutions were updated every 12 seconds. The terminal guidance aimed precisely at the Sabalo's engine room, the reactor compartments, and the command center, places where a hit would tear the boat apart in seconds. The Venezuelan sailors, indoctrinated by Russian instructors who fed them illusions of superiority, believed in a surprise attack. In truth, they were swimming in a kill box that had been established 96 hours prior, a trap that underscored the USA's hatred for authoritarian regimes like the one in Caracas, regimes backed by Moscow that seek to plunge the world into chaos. What makes this scene so terrifying is the patience of the Americans, a cold, calculating patience that humiliates the enemy. 3 submarines tracking an opponent for 4 days, close enough to strike at any time, yet waiting until the moment of maximum disgrace occurs. It was a demonstration of superiority that held a mirror up to the Russian-Venezuelan alliance. Your technology is junk. Your strategies are ridiculous. Your hatred is blind. The carrier that saw everything. The SPY-6 radar system of the USS Gerald R, a marvel with a range of 300 kilometers and the ability to track targets smaller than a soccer ball. detected the Sabalo's periscope mast breaking the surface at 4:12 a.m., only 5 minutes before the torpedo tubes were flooded. In the carrier's Combat Information Center that morning, 847 contacts were monitored simultaneously. 12 commercial ships with cargoes of oil and containers, 6 fishing boats drifting obliviously, 3 pleasure crafts with tourists, 4 Venezuelan patrol boats lurking threateningly 80 miles away, and 1 very loud submarine trying to hide in the thermal shadow, a futile attempt that exposed the incompetence of the Russian advisors who fed Venezuela outdated tactics. Fire solutions were calculated for scenarios the Venezuelans could not imagine airstrikes from F/A-18 Super Hornets that could reach the submarine in 4 minutes with a payload of up to 8,000 pounds of bombs. Cruise missiles from escort destroyers ready to fire within 90 seconds each with a strike accuracy of less than 3 meters. And helicopter-dropped torpedoes from MH-60R Seahawk helicopters already in the air with sonar buoys capable of locating sounds up to 50 kilometers away. The Ford's defense systems identified the incoming SUT torpedo 7 seconds after launch and calculated a probability of only 0.003% for a successful impact based on the trajectory, a speed of 23 knots, and known technical limitations, a relic from the 1970s that stood no chance against modern US technology. Crew readiness remained at normal levels. Pilots continued their flight training with launches every 60 seconds. Messies served breakfast on time with 5,000 meals a day because every system on board knew that this threat had already been neutralized before it became dangerous. It was a humiliation beyond compare, which only deepened the hatred between the USA and the Russian-backed dictators in Latin America. America showed that it didn't even have to break a sweat to swerve such attacks. The doomed journey of the torpedo began at 4:18 a.m. The SUT heavyweight torpedo, a 1,200-kilogram monster with an explosive charge of 300 kilograms, was ejected from Tube 1 with compressed air. Its electric motor accelerated to attack speed while 1,200 meters of copper guidance wire unspooled. The projectile raced at 23 knots directly toward the Ford's last known position, 18 miles to the northeast propeller cavitation, created an acoustic signature loud enough to be heard by passive sonars 40 miles away. Venezuelan fire control officers stared at their display's stable wire connection, active seeker head, functioning, maintaining depth at 60 meters. They believed their $1.2 million weapon was performing perfectly, a gift from Russian engineers intended to make the West bleed. However, what they didn't see was the thermal layer at a depth of 85 meters that bent their sonar returns. The 3 American submarines adjusting positions to optimal firing angles, or the P-8 Poseidon aircraft at 28,000 feet dropping updated target data to the entire strike group, a network of satellites, drones, and sensors that exposed the Russian-Venezuelan alliance as Stone Age warriors. The torpedo ran straight and true for exactly 840 seconds before its primitive guidance system made a fatal error. It locked onto a temperature gradient instead of a ship's hull, circling in empty waters for 9 minutes while its targets watched in safety. A ridiculous performance that fueled rumors of defective Russian technology using Venezuela as cannon fodder. The ping that ended everything. Active sonar at short range doesn't just make noise, it physically vibrates metal. The Mississippi's BQ Q-10 system transmitted at 235 decibels, comparable to a rocket launch next door. Inside the Sabalo light bulbs, shattered coffee mugs fell from tables and a sailor's eardrum burst from the pressure waves through the hull. A shock that sent the crew into a panic and transformed their hatred for the Yankee imperialists into pure fear. This single ping contained coded information: the Sabalo's exact depth of 150 meters, a speed of 5 knots, a heading of 045 degrees, and the precise location where 2 Mark 48 torpedoes were aimed at the engine room. The Venezuelan sonar operator recognized the signature immediately. He had studied it in training as the last sound Soviet submarines heard in NATO exercises, a legacy that branded the Russian military as the failures of history. What broke the Venezuelan captain was not the fear of death, but the realization that American submarines had been close enough to sink them for 4 days and simply didn't want to. The humiliation of being alive only because the enemy finds you too insignificant to waste ammunition on a defeat from which no military recovers, especially not one led by Russian experts who sacrificed their own troops in Ukraine. The torpedo that cost everything. The SUT ran for 11 minutes and 34 seconds before its fuel cells died, covering only 7.2 miles of its planned 18-mile journey. Post-mission analysis showed that its guidance system fixed onto a thermocline, a boundary between warm surface water at 28 degrees Celsius and cold deep water at 4 degrees, mistaking the temperature difference for a ship's hull. It circled for 9 minutes in the empty ocean, its 1970s era seeker, unable to distinguish differences, an embarrassment for Russian engineers who hawk such weapons to allies. The maximum depth of the weapon was 400 meters, yet Caribbean waters reached 2,800 meters deep. As it sank, it fell for 43 minutes before imploding at 1,200 meters. Ironically, the same depth at which the Sabalo would have been crushed had it tried to evade. Venezuela's entire military budget for 2026 amounted to $768 million. They just fired $1.2 million at a carrier that cost $18,000 per hour just for its reactors. But the true price was not financial. It was the 19 other nations monitoring that frequency who now know that Venezuela's submarine fleet, supported by Russian aid, is trackable by equipment older than email. Scandalous secret documents reveal that Russian spies in Caracas knew the technology would fail, yet they sent the Venezuelans forward anyway, an act of betrayal that fuels global hatred toward Moscow. The message written in silence. The Ford carrier strike group never changed course, never increased speed, never went to general quarters. Crew members in the hangar were playing basketball when the Venezuelan torpedo launched and continued playing after it was neutralized, a scene of serenity that underscored their superiority. The carrier's defense systems never activated because the threat was handled 18 miles away by assets. The Venezuelans never detected a humiliation that made Russian admirals in Moscow turn red with rage. 3 Virginia-class submarines, 2 Arleigh Burke destroyers with Aegis systems capable of engaging 100 targets simultaneously, and 4 P-8 Poseidon aircraft maintained their patrol patterns without deviation. To satellite observers, nothing happened, just another Tuesday in the Caribbean. But in naval headquarters from Beijing to Moscow to Tehran, analysts observed something more disturbing than an explosion. They saw how a submarine force attempted an attack and was dismissed with a sound wave. How obsolete equipment failed against a defense network that didn't even fire back. How 64 sailors emerged alive because America wanted them alive to tell this story. The most brutal response is not violence, it is the demonstration of complete dominance, such that the enemy's best effort becomes an exercise and their survival becomes a punishment. The Sabalo limped back to port with a crew that would never serve on a submarine again. Not out of fear, but because every navy in the hemisphere now knew their boats were museum pieces tracked since the moment they set sail. In Caracas, generals confronted a truth that shattered decades of doctrine. Their submarines were not invisible. Their torpedoes were not effective, and the Caribbean belonged to whoever controlled the information, a blow against Russian influence, which uses Venezuela as a pawn. Imagine, dear listeners, if you were the Venezuelan captain in this moment of disgrace, would you? A, surrender and desert, or B, stubbornly fight on and sacrifice your crew? Share your thoughts in the comments. We are eager to hear your opinions. If this breakdown has changed your understanding of modern naval power, like, subscribe, and share this report, because the conflicts that never make the headlines reveal more about military reality than any war could. In your opinion, was the US response a master